Hi, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of The Context. I am so excited for today's session. We are going to be diving really deeply into everything going on with MCP at Microsoft. And we've got a great group of speakers joining us. I do have a small change. Usually I'm joined by one of my co-founders, Darren Shepard, but he has a sick kid, so he is running off to the doctor's office to help deal with something there. And so stepping in ably to fill his shoes is another one of my co-founders, Craig Jellick. So Craig is joining us also from Arizona, and the two of us are going to be having, I think, a super interesting and fun conversation about MCP and how it's impacting GitHub and VS Code and all of that. So just a couple words before we get started. This live stream that we've been running for the last month or so has been awesome. We have been getting so many interesting talks submitted. People are building MCPs. They're building tools to use MCPs. They're sharing how their organizations are building MCPs. We've got an upcoming talk about using MCPs with 3D printers to create, literally to give AI the ability to create real things. So I am just really excited about what we've got coming. If you're interested in joining us and you'd like to present something you're working on, how your organization is approaching things, please submit a talk. You can just scan that code and find us, and or just go to our YouTube page. There's a link there as well, and tell us about what you're working on and what you'd like to talk about. So the next couple weeks, we've got some great talks. Not tomorrow, Thursday, we've got a talk from Hurist MCP, who is going to be talking about kind of AI agent swarms. Frank He is the co-founder there. So join us again at the same time in 2 days, and you'll hear from Frank. And then a talk that I've been really looking forward to, Matt White, who is at the Linux Foundation, is going to talk a little bit about standards, foundations, and how all of these specs that are being developed, they'd love to see them begin to move from sort of independent open source projects to foundation-owned projects or foundation-led projects. So I'm super excited for that talk. I think governance is going to be an important part of everything we're doing around MCP and some of the other protocols being built in the agentic space. So that should be a lot of great content. And then next week, we've got a talk about API gateways and sort of how they're merging to manage MCPs, coming from Pat White at Trago. And then a conversation about OAuth for MCP servers from the team at Scapkit. So should be a lot of good, interesting discussion. All right, so just for anybody who hasn't attended, our talks are fast. We try to move through things quickly. Today's going to be a little different because we've got we've got 3 guys working on from different areas on the different projects, but we typically try to get through content quickly and share a lot of information without taking hours and hours to do it. So we'll be moving quick today as well. Lots of demos, which I'm super excited for. And with that, let's get started. So let me introduce our guests really quickly. We have 3 people joining us today, 2 from GitHub and 1 from Microsoft. All the way from Amsterdam, we have Sam Morrow, who is the founder of the GitHub MCP and the principal engineer. He's built it from the ground up. Sam, it is awesome to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And from New Mexico, Toby Padilla, who is the principal project manager over on GitHub working on MCP. So Toby, it's going to be great to have you too. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, and finally, Harald Kirschner is joining, who from the VS Code side. He is the principal product manager over there, and he joins us from Mountain View here in California.
Thanks for having me. Awesome to be here.
In addition to all the work they're doing on these products inside Microsoft, Toby and Harald are working on the steering committee for the MCP project. I know Sam is pretty involved as well. So there's a lot coming back from Microsoft into MCP and a lot going from MCP into these Microsoft products. So I am, like I said, super excited for today's talk. So with that, Toby, Sam, I think you're going to lead us off and tell us a little bit about what you've been working on. Do you want me to pop your screen up there, Sam, and maybe kick us off?
Well, if you pop my screen off, I'm going to start demoing things pretty fast. But I can talk a little bit about it at the same time. Like, I think you've heard Anthropic created the kind of reference server for GitHub, as well as a whole bunch of other stuff when they released the protocol. And literally it started internally. Toby posted a message just seeing if any kind of gophers were interested in making a start. And I don't know, Toby, do you want to add to that? But
yeah, so essentially, as you know, Anthropic kickstarted MCP by creating a bunch of reference servers, right? Like they made like 20 or 30 of these things, and the GitHub server was one of them. And they told us it was one of the most popular MCP servers that they had created. So we were already working with them because we had integrations with their models, and we approached them about taking ownership of it because we wanted sort of deeper integration with our platform and sort of to lead the development from there. And I had actually just started at GitHub in December, so I'm relatively new. And like Sam said, I basically went into our Golang channel in Slack and said, hey, does anyone want to volunteer to work on this thing? And Sam's like, yeah, I love Go, and this seems super interesting. So he kind of came on board and just cranked out the first version, him and a couple other devs that we had. And we rewrote the whole thing from TypeScript into Go. And we open sourced it in early April. So it's a couple months old now. And it kind of took off right away. So the week that we launched it, it was actually the most popular open source repo in all of GitHub. So that was really exciting to see that there was so much like passion around this space from our user base. And I think the AI users in general and just sort of the open source community. And now we've got, if I look at it now, we've got 16,300 stars and 1,200 forks on it. So we're seeing kind of a massive amount of community engagement, lots of PRs, lots of issues being put in there. And so that's been a really great thing to see. And the server's evolved quite a bit. At first, we kind of ported it one-to-one for what Anthropic had built so that you could just drop it in as a replacement. But now it has a bunch more tools. It has a bunch of features, and Sam's going to demo like some of the kind of weirder, more cutting edge stuff that we've put into it. Also sort of notable is 2 weeks ago, we launched the remote version of the server. So this was sort of dependent on some of the changes that have evolved in the spec around OAuth, right? So there was remote server was a possibility in one of the previous versions of the MCP protocol spec. But the version that just came out last week, and it was in draft before that, has these OAuth changes that we collaborated with sort of Anthropic and Okta and other people from the community to help drive forward. And that really unlocked our ability to turn our server into a remote server. And we did that for a couple of reasons. One is that it's more secure. Like if you look at how the local server works versus the remote server, with the local server, you have to mint what's called a personal access token. It's kind of an onerous process on the end user. You have to go in and like check a bunch of boxes, and it's just not a great way to authorize into a system. And so with OAuth, you can just like click through your typical OAuth flow, right? Like you go to a web page and you're like, yes, I give this thing access to my stuff and get going. So that's a better user experience there. It's also a little bit easier to get up and running because with the local version, it was dependent on Docker, or you had to get the Golang binary to run it. And that was sort of our number one complaint. It's like, why are you making me use Docker to run this thing? But now with the remote server, you just pop a URL into your host, into VS Code, and then you're off and running after you do the OAuth flow. So all of that kind of came together, and we're already seeing pretty good uptake on the remote server, and we're excited to sort of push it forward. Also gives us a chance to integrate it with some of our backend systems that aren't necessarily public in the API, which gives us an opportunity to do even more interesting things with the server.
So yeah, let me start by just I'll just showcase that like one thing that I've been excited about that I feel VS Code implemented really well was you can return resources from tool calls now, which is just, it's a really nice way to wrap kind of file responses when you're sending the whole file. Oh, sorry, I've got too many servers open. Let me just quickly remedy that. A classic. It had to be the first demo, didn't it?
Always is, and it's not usually a sign of things to come, Sam. I'm going to warn you that this always means more chaos. But I'm used to Darren, where there's always chaos. So
well,
it will be the exception to the rule.
Let's try straight again and just see what happens. But yeah, I was hitting into model tool limitations, which is not surprising. But yeah, I'm always working on like loads of versions of the same server, as you might expect, and it's an interesting thing that comes with the development. But hopefully, at some point, it's going to decide to actually look at the files from the remote and not from my local. Yeah, there we go. Beautiful. So that was quick once it actually did it. And you can see the tool call. And then if I click, like, you know, there's a markdown file there, and that's just straight from the resource. So you can look at it, but also it's like it's create, you know, I told it to do some stuff as well. So now it's created hopefully a cool file for like summarizing our contributing guidelines. So what I'm actually going to do is open the preview and to close this for a second so you can kind of have a look. But it just generated this file from pulling another file down, and then, like, you know, made a chart based on our descriptions. So, like, you know, it's nice being able to get the context of kind of any file that you have access to on GitHub, and then get an agent to do something with it. Like, obviously, you know, it's kind of, if I like the demoing very open-ended questions for like the visual kind of impact, but when I'm doing real work, I still use the same features. And like another very quick one I wanted to look at was just because I like it, with the same feature, if I ask for like an image, like VS Code also supports, you know, image and sound and stuff. So like I don't know if it shows up in the pop-up window, but like if I do the same thing in here, like you actually get a hover over showcasing the image, which I think is really cool. I'm going to go for some more ambitious demos now. I just wanted to kind of warm up, make sure that my environment was working.
I think it's worth noting too that VS Code has, and Harald will talk about this, a lot of support for the spec, kind of beyond what most hosts have. So not just resources, but some of the, like, I think Harald's sampling is even in the latest version, right, of at least VS Code Insiders. So we've been able to do sort of both ends of the equation, where we have an MCP host inside of Microsoft, and now we have a very popular MCP server. So we can kind of collaborate and push each other forward and be at the cutting edge of the spec. So resources like what Sam is demoing is not even supported in all of the MCP servers or all the MCP hosts. And VS Code does a really good job of it. And that's passing these files back and forth in terms of like the URI and MIME type that comes back. But I think a lot of the content is also base 64 encoded in the response, which is a good and a bad thing, because it does use a lot of the context window there. But
so let's do something a little bit crazier, and let's just start asking it to create a repo in my GitHub account and just see what it does. Hopefully,
even Sam, maybe you can talk a little bit about the tool annotations that are going by.
So like a real subtle feature as well is it prompted me this time, because this is actually creating a repository. But most of the times you've just seen these tool calls kind of whistle past, and that's because VS Code's implemented the read-only hint annotations, which means that like by default it doesn't request confirmation for read requests. So for me, I found that a really nice distinction, where I know when it prompts me that it's actually going to do some active work, and makes me a little bit more vigilant about exactly what it's doing on my behalf. You know, like you can really look into the details, and now you can see, even if I was in a non-code environment, the GitHub MCP server lets you push file content. So it's created a file and created it in the repo it just created for me, which already I think is quite cool. And yeah, now it's...
And even those text descriptions have evolved over time. I think the first iteration of this was just like the tool name itself. But now you have the human readable annotation for the tool call, which is significantly nicer for the end user.
So yeah, I mean,
speaking of this kind of like back and forth, I mean, have you guys thought a little bit about elicitations and how that might sort of begin to, you know, create more of a dialogue in the relationship?
So we added support. So we added support in VS Code just last week. So it landed with the latest spec support as the MCP spec updated. VS Code had elicitations basically the same day in main. I definitely think it's something developers have to think about now, like how to bring like specific user input in, like because the LLM input is always a bit like indeterministic, right? It tries to like make a best guess of what you're aiming to do. And in all the tool calls you see happening, if you have a confirmed dialog, you can actually go into the JSON and you can edit it, right? A lot of people don't. If you have it, can auto accept it. We even apply the JSON schema and show you linting squiggles to that you can get it right. So there's a lot of things already in there, but I think the elicitations one, maybe for people who haven't seen the spec, it's basically allows you from the server at any point in time, even it doesn't have to be within a tool call, to show basically an input to the user of like, please provide some user specific input that I need for my flow. And that could be a repo that you lock it against, right? I think that's a typical one where sometimes you're not fully sure, especially if you're behind a proxy, potentially the finding the right repo might be really hard. So I think there might be ways to bring some of that kind of user input back into more consistent flows.
Do you expect, Harald, that like SAM and MCP developers will be kind of figuring out how to incorporate that elicitation into the MCP specifically, and you'll just be presenting it through VS Code? Is that kind of your expectation?
Yeah, I mean the spec for elicitation is very similar. Basically, it's a message like, please provide this value, and there's some extra structure around it on how to describe it. But overall, it's I'm not sure if there's a completions behind it, but I think there is. So the demos we made are just like asking for preferences. So, but I think there's definitely a need, and that's across other parts of the spec as well. The need for better reference servers and really showing like how this adds user value versus just tools. Like a lot of things right now, anything you can do with tools just in a slightly different way, and then resources, like as Sam shows, allows you to cut down a bit on the token usage and just return the resource, and you can actually download it. Because otherwise, if you just return an image, the LLM sees the image, but you as a user, you never see the image. You might be able to hover it, but there's no way to tell me as a user that there's an image. You can download it for reference. You can look at it, and that's I think the interesting part of resources. But it's really hard to explain if there's no good actual implementations for it.
Sam, are you thinking about like has that new function started to come into your design, and how you're thinking about updating the GitHub MCP server?
I mean, like 100%. I think like there's both the kind of entry level that we have. Maybe if you're deleting a repository or something, like we're for sure going to send an elicitation. You know, we haven't added delete functionality, but I feel like maybe with elicitation we could consider it. Like I'd be too scared to do certain things without real confirmation. And
similar to on GitHub, right? You delete a repo and you have to type the name of the repo in to confirm that you actually want to do that. That would be almost a one-to-one port to elicitations if we wanted to go about it like that.
Sam, how about sampling? Have you found a use case for sampling within the GitHub MCP server? Seems like it might be a little bit of a stretch. Just curious.
No, you know what? Like, I think I've been ideating on it a lot, and actually, I gave a workshop last week to like hundreds of hubbers in the end, like to building your own MCP server, and I covered like exactly those sorts of things, like how you can have sampling. I had example repos that allowed them to kind of start that already had tool calls that like my trivial example was like you'd put in a pizza order and then it would suggest another pizza order that you should have ordered and then return that, and like it's fun to play with it. But in terms of real use, like things like suggesting like what tags and things, like what labels should be on an issue, is that kind of area where you don't want the LLM that's like when it's making the tool call to have to make necessarily every granular decision, but you might want to add a little bit more color to the outgoing data before you create something. But then also, if you can get some interesting inbound data, but then it would be nice if it was structured in like Markdown or something, or as a CSV. Maybe you also can just make use of the host LLM to kind of structure it. And
something that we've been looking at as well is combining sampling with potentially dynamic tools. So imagine you're bringing some context. You have some Word documents or maybe even a GitHub repo or something like that. And you want an MCP server around that can provide the context in kind of a very domain specific way to the LLM. Where you can imagine taking all of that just raw, like markdown files, docs and all of that, and then using sampling and saying like, hey, host LLM, create some tool names specific to the domain of the content in these files. And then having the LLM analyze the content and say it's like coding guidelines or something. And then it spits out a new tool that's like what the next step in the coding guideline or the next whatever, right? And that would be using sampling to make dynamic tools, using tool change notifications to shove them back in the host, and kind of constructing this interesting MCP server on the fly based off of the content that's inside of it.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. That's cool.
Yeah, so we also saw the first demos of people using it for dynamic tool calling in a way that there's like one entry point and it figures out what tools to actually trigger based on what you're asking. So doing some intent detection and routing and tool calling via sampling, because like a lot of servers like within larger companies struggle with that. Like basically the server represents the org chart and just the breadth of everything, and it's really hard to maintain that scope of like a well-tuned surface for MCP, which works in an API. It's just you pick and choose what you need, but in MCP that's still like an unsolved problem. Right. We're also working on, but right now having servers that are kind of using that sampling technique of just like I can sample myself down to what you need.
Yeah.
Because maybe after your demo, Sam, you could do some of the dynamic tool change stuff that we've done, which doesn't use sampling. It uses a round trip in the agent, but you could imagine how that would work with sampling instead.
And I was going to quickly as well show just as another like relatively new feature. So I got it to create a repository about bat facts and push it to my account. I also told it to open like some low quality issues and then also some higher quality ones about redesigning in different themes. This like HTML page it also generated for me. I haven't looked at any of it yet, so we'll get like a reveal later at what's it done. But so I've added it's in the main, but it's not in an actual release yet, but a first prompt now, which is I think it's pretty cool. Like the idea is basically that I'll start it running like it tells it to kind of do a workflow where it's going to assign issues to the GitHub coding agent, and so just defer a bunch of issues to another agent, but it's meant to kind of have a think through the issues quality and decide ones that it thinks are like a valid target, and hopefully it's going to get my like 10 most recent issues on this repo, and then it's going to tell me which ones it thinks it can do. And like it correctly identified, like ones it thought it couldn't work on. And so now it's going to start assigning issues it thinks that a coding agent could work on, and I'll allow it for the session, and you should see it's going to do, I think, 5.
This is kind of interesting too, because you hear a lot about like A to A, right? Like agent to agent protocol. And if you can actually do this in MCP instead. And one of the things we're seeing here is that for those unfamiliar with the GitHub coding agent, the way it works is you create an issue and then you assign the issue to Copilot, and then it works asynchronously on that issue. And then it opens a pull request that it has written to satisfy the issue. So that's an agentic workflow that has hooks into the GitHub platform. And here what you're seeing is using the agent inside of VS Code to call the MCP server to create and assign issues to the coding agent on GitHub, not talking to that agent directly yet, just talking to GitHub. And then GitHub talks to that agent. The coding agent does the PRs and closes the issue. And then that comes back. So you're seeing the agent in VS Code communicate with the coding agent inside of GitHub through the GitHub platform. So using the same platform that humans use to collaborate, in our case, GitHub, for agents to collaborate, and they're doing that through MCP. There's probably better ways to do this where we can send back progress of how all this is working. And I think there's been a lot of talk from the MCP steering committee around how best to do asynchronous tasks. But it's kind of interesting that you can leverage a collaboration platform that already exists for people, for agents, to work on it as well. So that's something you don't hear a lot about with agent to agent. I think people are trying to invent a lot of that from the ground up. But if you can leverage something that already exists, I think this is a demonstration that it works pretty well.
It's a smart design too, being able to use that same collaboration platform. I mean, it fits really well. We've had this conversation internally as well. Like it fits right there. You know, you kind of get human in the loop for free too. I can throw a comment on there and, you know, the agent can respond to it, that sort of thing.
Exactly. You have to approve the pull request and merge it, right? So Git itself is a great platform for collaboration, probably one of the best. And so you can, you're actually using agents with Git and GitHub. And then you've got human in the loop, human reviews. You can actually, the way the coding agent works is you can leave comments on the PR and it will go back to the agent and it'll continue to work based off of what you tell it. So yeah, we've been finding it, and this is Sam demonstrating it. These are all the tasks that the coding agent has done based off of what he fired off inside of VS Code.
And like it's worth going back to like the prompt support's great because one, I was able to make sure it was working on the repo I actually wanted it to, but also it allowed me to give a user a kind of a one shot that would be a kind of structured multiple tool call that had a relatively deterministic result. And that's kind of at least what I'm imagining prompts are for. Like simple prompts is kind of fine, but people can probably come up with them. But like where it's a whole workflow, it's really cool. So yeah, I mean, I'm going to let this spin for a while because who knows how long it'll take. I think it's actually quite close to finished, but we can always return to that.
And Sam, are you using roots with the prompts to know which repo to look at? Is that why? Do we do that? I don't know.
No, not yet. I really want to start using roots for some smarter, like at least for like. So one of the things we have is like a get me tool, which allows the server, like the LLM, you know, to know who I am. But I also want via roots to be able to provide a kind of a Git like repo or something, and be able to like add some context tools dynamically. For instance, there's like current repo. And so like if I make references to my current repo or whatever, like it doesn't need to go and check. It just knows. And like I quite imagine us doing that kind of workflow. But yeah, like I mean it's all it's all pretty new, so we're just kind of having fun with it at first to see if we can make it do the kind of things that we want it to do.
I had to laugh when you said get me. In our pre-MCP work, as we wrote a bunch of tools for services, I think we implemented get me in every single one of them. It's like you just need that little extra context to know what you're doing.
We think of it as like the natural language user experience. The first, the Anthropic reference MCP server that they wrote for GitHub didn't have get me, and it would fail quite a bit if you're like, show me my private repos or whatever, right? And so that was the first thing that we created in addition to the original tools that were available, and it really improved a lot of the just the user experience, because you talk to it like you don't think of like calling an API. You're actually speaking to it like you would a person, and so you kind of have to craft the tool names and tool descriptions. So it's great to hear that you also implemented get me, because it's super helpful. It gets called like almost every single time.
Yeah. How do you all how are you handling sort of, you know, testing the GitHub MCP server against different models? Because, you know, in my experience, this tool description and name is perfect for this model, but then, you know, you try it on a different model and it gets confused. So are you worrying much about that, or?
We worry about that constantly. we don't have a great solution yet, but as you said, it's like it matters, right? Like the GPT-4o is going to behave different than Claude 3.6 or whatever, and so you have to. We're starting to think about testing frameworks. It's not just even the model; it's also the agents, the hosts, the system prompts, combination with other MCP servers. Like it's a wild amount of space that you have to try to think about, and these things combine in ways that aren't always expected, and it's different with different models, right? We've seen, I think it's kind of well known at this point, but the GPT models don't support all of the JSON schema, for instance. So I think like any of or all of is not supported, and it'll just error out immediately if you present that as one of the JSON schemas for an argument. And so there's like technical limitations like that, but then there's also these qualitative differences between, when you call the tool get repos versus get repositories, that works great in Claude, but the other one works good in GPT. So it's definitely a massive challenge that I think probably everyone who's building these servers is starting to face. And we'll do a new release, and then we'll immediately start getting issues saying like, it doesn't work in Windsurf anymore, right? Or something like that. And that's definitely a challenge. We're lucky in that we have a massive community of open source people working on this now, so it gets reported almost immediately, and then we'll see even fixes come in from the community. But it's an area where we're looking at building tooling internally, and I imagine a lot of people are probably doing that as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's some technical issues as well. Like it's a as well, you're trying to make everything work in every different model. You're trying to make the tool calls make sense. And I think like there's been some improvements, like a real niche example for people who are building remote servers, for example, is that the stateless version of them doesn't work for proper negotiation of capabilities, because the capabilities are negotiated in the initialize request. And so you get left with like one initialize call, and then like with another stateless call where you've forgotten all that. So you have no idea if the client supports sampling or not. And so you basically have to implement state in order to actually successfully, understand the capabilities that an ongoing session has. So, like it's really interesting learning these things, and like it kind of, people fudge around it for now by just kind of supporting stuff, and if it doesn't work, it just kind of fails. But like gradually, as the servers and the SDKs and the host applications become more like better citizens, and there are more versions of the specification, like they actually need to kind of negotiate what version they're talking on, right? And I think that will get better, but it's an interesting challenge
for sure.
Sam, I want to be a little mindful of the time. I know we've been going for about 30 minutes. I want to make sure we leave Harald some time to show us the VS Code stuff. Was there another demo you wanted to kind of conclude with? And
well, I'll very quickly wrap up this one, because I think now I was just gonna ask, like, so can you get all the HTML files from my bat facts repo in each PR that is open? Right, let's see. Anyway, hopefully it will get all these, because I'll show like the kind of the last stage of this, assuming it succeeds and pulls them down. And then like another brief thing which I can also plug away at is you may have heard there was some various like security issues with MCP and things like that, and GitHub's no stranger to kind of the challenges of providing useful tools and data with the risks of kind of prompt injection. And like, I mean, VS Code doesn't require you to keep your tokens plain text beside beside the actual agent, but a lot of applications still don't have a token storage solution. So a lot of people have plain text in a kind of place that the agent theoretically has file access to, which is a kind of a clear problem. So before I show the end of that, let me just quickly, if I switch to the remote server for a minute, because this is the kind of like a thing we're experimenting with that we can only currently do on the remote server. So if I create I need to find a secret that I have already revoked, so I don't mind sharing it scarily. But let me see if I can find the I'll come back to this because I think we want to talk about security a bit more later. I just need to revoke a secret, but so I'll show you what agent mode did before we move on, basically, because I think this is just a fun thing. So I told it to redesign stuff, and it just took what would have been a really plain web page about Batfax and just do some real crazy redesigns. And with the resources, it's just pulled them down, and I can preview them with a preview plugin. So I was literally able to just spawn off, offload like tasks to an agent and then just see what it did. And I think it's really interesting to see the kind of like massively dare I say creative things that this model has come up with. It's kind of, for me, it blows my mind every time I see these, because you never know what you're going to end up with. But being able to this kind of almost map produce, I want you to try a bunch of these things, open a bunch of issues, and then see what work got done and decide if I like the quality of it. I think it's a real amazingly powerful thing to do. So I'm super excited about that personally. If you guys, I don't know if you wanted to talk about security for a minute, but there's very quickly one last thing I want to do, but I think I'm going to have to go off in the side and actually create a token and then revoke it for myself so I can show you.
Maybe Harald, you could give a bit of your demo for your awesome MCP server that you've written.
Do some of the awesome stuff. But Sam, so you've been using the remote MCP server, right?
I've been using a mix, depending on what
all of it. Yeah. Maybe just to show off the ease of how this right now works. So this is the repo where you get it from. Scroll down. There's install buttons. I'm on Insiders, which is our kind of nightly version of VS Code. So if I just hit this button, just see what I have open. So here is my VS Code. Just hit install server, and now I can already just hit install. It goes into my user settings down here, and that's cool now. So it's just the URL. So no packages, no extra Docker, no fuzz, and it's always up to date. So security wise, it's best. And then now with the latest spec and OAuth support, basically we already supported before last week. The new cut came out for the spec, and that's basically now we're in VS Code. We already have authentication for GitHub, right? Because we're you can commit to GitHub. You have the GitHub pull request extension. We have GitHub Copilot. All of these know your GitHub login. So right now I just need to basically allow which account to use, and that's it. So auth solved. But it's the happy path for GitHub. But if you use Sentry, Atlassian, and all of these that use auth, will just out of the box will just work nicely. So now I should go up here into my GitHub login. I see trusted MCP servers. Anytime I don't want to use the GitHub MCP server, I can basically take that auth out again. So that's kind of the layer of in the beginning of and where MCP came out, how people put in their API keys, and maybe that's also worth showing off here. So we don't have API keys actually in plain text in your configuration. We have these inputs, which our system VS Code already had for tasks, because we didn't want to have tasks or JSON in repos where people put in API keys because they need to run against some endpoint. So all of these are actually not in the file. So all of these are actually in storage, securely tucked away in VS Code and not synchronized. They're on your machine, but in keychain and on macOS.
I appreciate that. Just a day or two ago, I was recording something and my config for MCP servers in a different host popped up. I was like, oh, there's my keys. I just exposed them on the recording. Throw the recording away, start over.
Yeah, and that's like it's just to see where they find. So they're basically just up here. They're defined as inputs. Once their password, we basically never show them in the UI. They're always encrypted. Prompting just means like how we get to them. So it's really, and they happen like once you actually install a server that has one of these, we already bring in an input, and that scales nicely. Once there's a registry, you can also bring these inputs with you. So you could have a form to actually guide you through the setup and all that. So that's a concept we're trying to bring in as well. But definitely nice to like not have to worry about like, oh no, my keys are in plain text in some file that potentially gets committed at some point, and then I have to do a lot of work to get it out again. Also, because like this you can actually get out to everybody in your team, and everybody just puts in the API key they need, and not like somehow have to do secret management on all these points. Yeah, so that's kind of the initial ones. What I have a bunch of them, so we can just talk about like what shipped maybe first. So this is the blog post that came out, I guess, 12 days ago. So, and that's kind of with the release of the last VS Code. We release monthly. So the last release added the full spec support. Now, I see before the new release of the MCP spec was cut. So I was like, should we call it? Is it like pre-full spec? What is it? So, but now it's out, so it's easier to talk about. And we talk about OAuth. We talk about a few things Sam showed, prompts, resources which you can easily attach, and as context, and then sampling as well. And I think for me, like the biggest item though is like the security first, like streamable HTTP plus auth, which I think for MCP, getting people out of that kind of local only system with API keys and really building something that scales to many more users, that scales to an enterprise setup where people care about security, that doesn't, it's just like my local machine, I can run anything kind of problem. So that's,
we are spending so much time talking to companies that are, now actually really serious about MCP. I mean, I think the last change was just monumental. This piece right here, it's like until you could really run them and then centrally manage them and begin to do some, some auth controls and, detailed access privilege and stuff, it was hard to envision a layer of control that IT could get behind and be like, yeah, this is something we can control. So this is the stuff that I think was, allows this to get to where we've all kind of obviously seen the need for, and now it's like, whoa, this is really going to happen, and it's going to happen pretty fast. I think now that this layer exists. I don't know if are you guys hearing the same thing at Microsoft?
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you see that kind of behind the scenes. Like there's a lot of work that happened in the auth spec. If you follow along, like how many companies were involved, from Okta, Auth0, Microsoft has been driving it. So, and you hear the appreciation in the MCP steering committee, like so many like security experts actually jumped in and helped to refine this back to something that handles the auth at scale that people needed. So there's a lot of, it's really like you notice that people really wanted this and people wanted to get it done right. So now we're at the point where it feels right, and there's more follow-up. Like there's per tools authentication, so you can kind of scope it down to tools as well. So there's a few things now coming up after we have like the baseline to build out further. But yes, if you want to check this one out, so you should show it on the screen. But this is Dan's blog, who's been heavily involved, and I want to keep reading.
I think as well in your talk with David about the new spec recently, the one of the things they talked about was like elicitation kind of pass through, and it's like like kind of obviously, and like never mind if your server like on a one level is doing something that needs confirmation, it's like actually theoretically like many levels can pass that back down all the way to the end user now. So like I think there's so many areas where better controls can be implemented.
Maybe that's kind of next. I also want to show like this is not cool because I can actually open up PRs of the things. So all these things land in the open source VS Code repo. So just 5 days ago we got elicitation support so it's in VS Code Insiders now, and that's in the demo you see kind of you can actually ask in the chat now, and you can then provide this feedback in the prompt. So people always struggle with like the spec having an idea and then no client having supported it. This is always like the first mover disadvantage of you having to figure out all the problems. I think that's something I struggle with in the spec as well. Like a lot of the ideas on resources there's like one implementation with Claude desktop potentially, but there's all these ideas like, oh, you can apply RAG on the resources. You can do some really interesting things, but how do you do that? So figuring out as a client and getting people like Connor who deeply invested here to think about like what is the user experience, what is that integration is really interesting, I think, and then bringing back the learnings back to the spec because nobody like has done the depth of integration to refine it further, right?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see like the spec evolve in response to actual usage, actual implementation, because like you said, it's still early for the spec for sure.
When will this land in the non-insider? It's a monthly release you guys are on, right, Harald?
Yeah.
So sometime in August or July.
I think it's great. Sorry, go on.
Yeah,
I was going to
the
say
next release is July. Sorry, go ahead.
It was exactly on the topic you were talking about like that collaboration on the spec and potentially influencing the spec. And I was only going to mention that Harald and Connor and Toby and I are talking in Slack literally daily often. And like Connor and I iterated on completion support, for example, and we realized that there was dependent arguments for template resources often in order to complete the next value in a template, and there was nothing in the spec to allow you to pass back the values to the next completion. So the fact that we were able to build an MCP server and host application together that's applying the spec kind of in real time, that the fix for that is in the new spec that Harold's got on the screen there, and it's it's amazing.
Yeah, I think that's the most fruitful thing. We have a lot of teams within Microsoft, like the Azure DevOps MCP just came out. There's one for Azure, and they all have interesting struggles with the spec. Like prompts came up really early on as like read one prompts. Like you want to drive interesting user interactions from the client because nobody knows how to really prompt these MCP servers. If you don't give an example, like here's all the tools you can use, and like how do I use it? Like things Sam showed, like you can chain these interesting workflows. You don't just want to pull an issue and read it in the LLM. Like you can, but you want to pull an issue, read it, like do something interesting with it, or pull many issues and combine it and make some sense of it. So I think people have to
do every day, right? Like check every day. I mean, the automation starts to become a kind of, it's easy to imagine VS Code having an automation engine built in, very soon, where you're just like, hey, do this regularly, or Copilot or somewhere in there, because
we actually have another sort of important piece of the puzzle as well, which we haven't really talked about, which is the SDK. So we have the C# MCP SDK, the official one, and that's also something that we're keeping super up to date. We don't use it for the GitHub MCP server. We use the Go MCP project, which is Google's coming out with an official version of the Golang SDK. So we're probably going to migrate to that. But a lot of the MCP servers being built inside of Microsoft are being built with the C# SDK, which is also, we're keeping it on sort of the bleeding edge of the spec. In fact, I think if you look at all the SDKs, the C# one tends to be the one that has the most of the protocol actually implemented at any given time.
Yeah. Because I want to be mindful of time. Harald, was there anything else you wanted to demo before we maybe handed it back to Sam to finish up his last
just some demos? That's it. So this is one demo just to show us one aspect we have now. This is just a weekend thing. So ChatterTT is a local model that came out. It's open weights. You can find it on GitHub and Hugging Face. And I was like, this is cool. I want to now use something, do something interesting with that. So now I can actually do this MCP server explosive prompts. So I built it during the time when all the pieces landed. I was like, I need to use everything right now. And now I can actually ask it this daily haiku. So you pick a prompt, it's automatically resolved into input. The only tool this exposes that's kind of interesting is the kind of speak text one. It has resources as well. So now I can do that. The server is now innocently to show it off has this other property, this dev property. So development mode for MCP servers is something a lot of people have brought up on. Because of all the processes are handled by the client, it's really hard to attach a debugger to your server. Like it's possible to basically putting things onto a port and then connecting to the port. This one now, it actually also what you see now here is progress notifications. Because the model is running, I can actually bring back progress into the tool, even though it's a long run tool because it's a local model. It will take some time to actually generate. But meanwhile, I can show progress.
Flows like water. Summer light through editor. Dreams become pixels.
Yes, you might have heard that. So it was my voice because it's my sample, which makes this extra E. So my lips didn't move, but it was me. Which is fun. But the dev property basically what allows you anytime any Python change happens in this repository based on this glob, it will actually restart the process for me and reattach it. And then because I have a debug pie, I can actually now hit debug here up here, and we'll put the server into debug mode. Didn't run this for a while, but yeah. So I can now actually attach breakpoints if I am in debug mode. So that works for TypeScript and for Python. And if something happens and errors out, I can actually open the logs, which I think surprisingly in many clients, there's no way to open the logs for an MCP server. So it's really painful.
It's painful.
But here you have everything, like forever you log, and then it's really hard to logging in MCP as well. So a lot of these things are in place here, which is awesome. I think lastly, this one now, because it played back, because it is audio, I can actually now download the WAV file because I extracted from the audio as well to play it back, and I can actually have access to that as well. So there's a lot of interesting things like resources, prompts, sampling. The name of the file is actually based on sampling. So I just give it the transcript that comes in and to tell me, please make a slug for this using sampling. And that's actually also in settings. So if I go to my workspace file, this is the access to sampling. So previously I did allow it, and now it has access to my local LM. So that's something we already had before.
And did I follow correctly? This is sort of like your personal project MCP server to test out these like advanced functionality. Is that right?
Yes, that's more. It's also on GitHub, so if you want to check it out, it's easy to work in. It just like anytime it needs help with the SDK, which is constantly in flux, it just looks at the GitHub repo because we have this cross repo awareness, so it's really easy to work in. I have no big background in Python, but this still works pretty well. That's really more personal, but also to
that was great. It's super cool. Yeah, I'd love to try it out.
Yeah, what's the URL for that, Harald?
Chatterbot. Yes, put up on the. Look at my GitHub, and I think I pushed it. Yeah, Chatbox MCP. I got to talk about this more. It's a fun one. Yeah, it didn't have my voice in there, so you have to use your own voice. But yeah, that's the other one. So this is a chat mode. We have the support now in VS Code. You can make your own chat modes. If I go over into chat, this is using a mud MCP, and there's also a page for that. So mud MCP is this one, Nextlen, mud MCP. And it's a demo somebody made within Microsoft to play around with dynamic tool calling. So every time your character goes into a different room in this adventure game, the action of what they can do is updated by dynamic tool calling. So now, if I go into mud mode, it just tells me it's the mud game master. So just let's play. And because like now the magic starts, the mud MCP kicks off and guides me through my adventure. So it knows it's a look tool. It is an inventory tool. It tells the story where you're at in the dungeon. There's a torch to go light the way. Take the torch. Okay, take torch and move north, I guess. Let's go into a dungeon. I want to look at runes. So now because it will take the torch, then the torch is gone. So you take the torch. Now I have a torch in my inventory. It moves and looks around. So now if you look at the servers, the tools. So the tools now update. So there's no more, there's still talking, but this list basically, as I move through rooms, will then also update and shift around. Yeah. What's interesting now is actually he Nixon added characters as well, and that's where he uses sampling, so you can try out in the server sampling as well and talk to characters, which will then kind of make up their own lines and as well. So it's a cool use case of thinking about what MCP can do, what it's capable of. Like if you think about like end-to-end workflows, and that team is working on really interesting like end-to-end workflows powered by MCP, where one tool tells about the next tool, but just understanding the workflows that's possible with the server is cool.
Yeah, that's great. I love seeing these advanced functionalities. It's awesome.
Yeah, and lastly, just a quick demo. So we have our demo. So this is, where's my other demo? Agent plan. So this is a project that's interesting. That was my this weekend project, and it's actually a make it bigger a bit. So this is also on GitHub. Open this one up. So this is a VS Code agent to do. So it's a VS Code extension that underlying uses MCP. So what I'm trying to do here is just basically give the VS Code agent a to-do list to write things down, and then kind of make it more dynamic and interesting as well. So in this case, it actually runs an MCP server because we have an API in VS Code to register an MCP server from within an extension. And that's interesting if you already have an MCP server for agentic extensions, for basically bringing your product into other AI agents. And you still want to do a VS Code extension to bring UI into it. And how this looks like, I do have this field, this new view in VS Code, but I also have tools down here in the dropdown. So I can go down here, and there's my agent to-dos, and these tools actually come from MCP in the extension, and as this view is being synchronized using via the MCP. So you can think about it like, oh, you can have the MCP doing cool functionality for the AI, and then bring in more functionality via the extension into VS Code.
It's cool. Is the extension actually sort of hitting MCP endpoints, or is there kind of like a shared, data structure they're both reading from?
There's a synchronization mechanism. Actually, the MCP server exposes an SSE endpoint that keeps it synchronized with the extension as well. So the server itself is HTTP, which is cool because then you can also talk to it from Cloud Desktop or any other AI agents running on your system because it's just running on a local port. Mm-hmm. So you can, I think, sort of figure out like, what is this? It could, for example, so I have a long backlog, but it could spawn like other agents like from as soon as you have a like well-formed to-do list with dependencies mapped out, you could like think about parallelizing those, like sending them out to different agents, and they work against the same MCP server, so they have a shared state, right? So there's all these like interesting capabilities you can think about once you have an underlying MCP server that's not just in one surface like VS Code, but it's could also be shared.
Yeah.
So that's one way. And the API is pretty simple. You just point to let's look at those. This is our MCP server, and then server docs. We're also working on some actual developer docs. If you go into extensions, actually not the extension API, you'll see that for MCP, there is this registered MCP provider. There's an example in our sample repos, but you just say there's a definition for a server, can be stdio, it can be HTTPS, and you just launch it from within the extension. It's really cool.
Very cool.
And we could do a whole session on some of these tools. I mean, this is like the Toby tool is really cool. Harald, really solving a lot of my problems, like lost in sessions that just sometimes get just way too far down in the weeds and wanting to sort of jump back and start a whole project over, or start a whole to-do line item over. Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, guys. We're actually at the 11 o'clock mark here in the West Coast. So,
Perfect.
Sam, I think there was something else you wanted to kind of show real fast. Was there one last?
Yeah, I'm all queued up. It's if you flick over to me, I was like, so people are generally a bit scared about indirect prompt injection when you can especially get data from public sources and things, and there's a chance that your agent might turn like accidentally malicious and like say like we discussed like having plain text secrets often stored beside MCP servers, and that being like the kind of thing that someone might try to exfiltrate one of your MCP tokens, like as an example, you know, like putting it into a public issue or something, and then repo known to the attacker. And one of the things we've been experimenting with is we have a secret scanning product, and I've been just working with the colleagues in the secret scanning team to try and get all the remote MCP calls using applying secret scanning just to make sure that tokens aren't getting leaked, and like as to what groups of users we're going to deliver it to or how it's going to work, like the details are still being ironed out. But like you can see there, oh, this is unfortunately not for watchers, not a valid token that you can use. I've already stopped it working, but the file I told it to post up had a secret in it, and it's just ran open issue, and oh, what's happened? And it's literally telling me that there's an OpenAI API key, and the secret scanning tool on our remote server, which I'm feature flagged into, has just literally blocked me from making that tool call, so it doesn't leak my secret. And like I think this kind of tool is just super powerful, right? And like you can see, it literally just plain text did what I asked it and sent the contents of data.txt, which happens to be a revoked OpenAI API key. And yeah, like the server just sends back this saying, we've got a high confidence that that's a leak key, so we just blocked your tool call. And like, it doesn't solve the privacy risks, which is like another avenue, but it, like in terms of like one major attack surface, it's just like, for me, I thought this is such a natural thing to do in an MCP server, and I'm so excited to hopefully get this out to the public soon, because it like I don't think people fully appreciate the level of risk. Yeah. But like once your API key is online, it's online, and it's like, you know, people can do stuff pretty fast these days. So,
and do you think this is something that can other people building MCP servers implement this and leverage this same thing, or is this something that only will exist in the GitHub universe? So it's kind of useful if I'm in GitHub, but it's not particularly useful for anyone outside of that ecosystem.
So I think there's a number of levels. Like one is like there's possible synergy with host applications as well, and I can't speak for GitHub on this topic. Like I have no insight into like the inner workings of product on this, but like I could imagine a future where we had partnerships in order to try and offer this to third parties. Like you know, certainly GitHub has done partnership things in the future, so like I'm not going to confirm or deny anything. I don't know, but I can imagine a future where like a partner service could potentially be offered one day.
Guys, this was fantastic. I really appreciate you blocking an hour, diving into all of this content, you know, sharing where you guys are at. I know we're out of time, so I'll wrap us up, but I would love to have you back. Would love to go into any of these. We could probably spend more time on any one of these areas. And when you guys get ready to, you know, to make your next big announcement, please come join us, because I think it's really awesome how you guys have jumped into MCP and contributed, as well as implemented it deeply inside of the different, you know, all sorts of parts of Microsoft. So, you know, fantastic job overall. Really, really impressive. Any last questions, Craig, or any comments, anybody?
No, great stuff.
Awesome. If there's any, you know, kind of URLs that people need, if you don't mind, just come to the YouTube. On the YouTube version of this, we'll try to put them in the comments so you can find Harald's cool little toys and some of the announcements and stuff. But otherwise, thanks everyone. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you on Thursday, hopefully.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.